Hi, I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today. All right, today I want to talk about my cherry pie filling canning recipe. You might wonder why I'm canning cherry pie filling in the winter time, but there are many great winter canning projects, and this for me is one of them. Sour pie cherries grow here in Northwest Washington at the end of June and very early July. Sour pie cherries are very delicate and they do not keep well if you pick them and put them in the fridge. They start to rot and soften almost immediately. For me, when we pick the sour pie cherries, those need to be processed like the same day or the next day at the latest. July's not a very fun time to do canning projects. It's hot and there's a lot of other work to be done in the garden and on the homestead. Never fear. Canning cherry pie filling is actually a recipe that asks you to put those cherries in the freezer first before canning them anyway. So what I do is I pick my pie cherries, I pit them, I put them in gallon-sized freezer bags and stick them in the freezer. And then I forget about them. And I come back to it sometime in November or December. This cherry pie filling canning recipe has you freeze the cherries because it actually helps break the cell structure of the fruit, which helps that fruit release its liquid. When you're canning cherry pie filling, you want to know how much liquid is going into your recipe. Otherwise, you'll end up with a recipe that has a lot of liquid or gel and not a lot of chunks of fruit. So we want a balance here, so we have a cherry pie that has a lot of cherries in it, not just cherry sauce. I have about 15 pounds of tart cherries that I picked and pitted here, frozen. Then I place these thawing cherries into strainers to thaw. And the goal here is to remove at least 8 or 9 cups of juice from the cherries. Let them drip until you can collect that much juice. The rest of this recipe moves really quickly, so I'm going to actually get my water bath canner ready now. And here's the water bath canner I use. Fill it with water, put the rack inside, and turn this on, but not to a full boil. I want it to start getting warm, but not start to boil until I'm ready to put my jars in. The ingredients for this cherry pie filling canning recipe include 12 to 15 pounds of sour tart pie cherries, frozen, 3.5 cups of sugar, 1 cup of clear gel, which is a modified cornstarch. That's a thickener specifically for canning, 1/4 cup of lemon juice, and an optional sprinkle of cinnamon. After my tart cherries are thawed and the liquid has drained, I reserve 8 or 9 cups of juice in a separate container. And then I'm going to take my big pot on my stove and I'm actually going to whisk only 4 cups of that reserved liquid. Not all of it. You're going to save some of this aside. What you're doing here is removing the excess liquid from the cherries and using just what you need to make the gel that's going to become your cherry pie filling, and you're going to add your cherries into it. So to not overcomplicate it, remove 8 or 9 cups of liquid from your cherries, but only use 4 in the recipe. The other remaining 4 or 5 cups of juice can get thrown away, but that would be crazy. So I make cherry syrup with that excess, and I'll show you how I do that in my next video. In the big pot, you're going to put the 4 cups of reserved cherry juice, your 3.5 cups of sugar, and your 1 cup of clear gel. And you want to add the clear gel when the liquid is still cold so that it incorporates well and doesn't get lumpy. I use a whisk for this pot and whisk well while I bring this to a boil, and then I boil it just until it begins to get thick. And that can happen quickly, so I recommend staying by it and stirring it the whole time. At that point, I add my 1/4 cup of lemon juice and boil it for maybe a minute more. And then I add my reserved cherries. Yeah, the cherries that were in the colander, all of them can go in. That's about 12 to 15 pounds. Meanwhile, I've gotten my quart jars ready, and I like to use quart jars for this recipe because I think 1 quart of pie filling is the perfect amount for a standard size pie. I'm going to ladle this cherry pie filling straight into these quart-sized jars, leaving 1 inch of headspace and being sure to remove any bubbles. Wiping the rims of the jar, adding my flats and my bands, and then moving these jars carefully into my water bath canner using my jar lifters. I'm going to process these for 35 minutes. That means once this comes to a boil, I put the lid on it, I set a timer for 35 minutes, and I let those jars stay in the water bath canner, submerged in water fully, boiling for 35 minutes. At the end of the 35 minutes, I turn the heat off, and I wait 5 minutes for things to calm down before I use my jar lifters again to remove these hot jars from the water bath canner. I put these jars on my counter on a towel and let them cool completely before I double check the seals to make sure all of them sealed properly. I'm going to wipe the jars down to make sure that there's no stickiness on the outside, and then I'm going to label the jars with the date and contents on the top. When I'm done, I put these on my canning shelf for use at a later date. And to use cherry pie filling that you've canned is so easy. All you do is prepare a pie crust if you wish, dump the can of cherry pie filling into the crust, and then bake as you would any other pie. Don't feel like making a pie crust? I usually don't. I use this cherry pie filling canning recipe to make a cherry crumble or a classic cherry cobbler or even cherry pie cookie bars. Cherry pie filling can also be used as a topping for ice cream or yogurt. It's ready to eat straight out of a jar or to heat up. Check back for my other video where I share what I do with the remaining juice and other ways that we preserve our tart pie cherries so we can use them all year long. I'm Lanny, and this was Preserving Today.